Yo! Today I'll be walking you through my process for creating this animation in Adobe Fresco. Fresco's got some great tools if you're an illustrator looking to add some motion to your artwork. Using frame-by-frame animation as well as their path tools and motion presets, you can get pretty dang creative. So if you want to learn how to make something like this, let's get into it. Alright, so in Adobe Fresco, I'm going to go ahead and open up a new document, and since I'm creating an animation that I'm going to post as a reel, I'm going to go to the social tab and I'm going to select their Instagram story / reel size. And now we start sketching. As always, I'm using the pencil brush, which you can find in the sketching category of your brush library. And this is how all my sketches start. I tend to not follow all the typical sketching rules that you might learn in art school, but for drawing characters or skeletons, it really does help me to map out some circles to get the composition right. So I'll usually lightly sketch out some lines and circles connecting the head and the rib cage to the hips and knees and feet and the arms and the elbows and the hands, and that just helps me have a roadmap going forward. Spooky season is upon us, so I was feeling inspired to create a Halloween scene. I love Halloween, it's my favorite holiday of all time, and it always inspires me to draw more. And I knew I wanted to keep it sort of Hawaii or warm weather inspired still, so I have this dude chilling in an inner tube in the ocean with a floating pumpkin that I decided to make his floating cooler full of beers. And my thinking is that this will be an eerie full moon scene with sharks, and the water will be more green and swampy looking just to keep it on the spooky side. As I'm drawing out my different elements, I'm planning ahead by keeping everything separated onto their own layers. So I have the skeleton in his tube, the pumpkin, the shark, and the background all separated, and for each of these elements I'm going to be keeping the colors and the line art separated as well, and then grouping them together into a layer group. As you start to add in color, you can just set your layer as a reference and add a layer below it and use that empty layer to start filling in all the parts of your drawing to keep the colors separated from the line art. This is just going to make it easier to layer in effects and shading later on. I had so much fun with this design, trying out new things that I've never done before. I wanted to create the look of water with some shading, and I totally winged it, but I think this turned out really cool and I will definitely be using this technique again. I basically just created this water looking pattern with a pixel brush, and then I used the smudging tool to just blend it out and make it look a little more wispy. Alright, time to get some things moving. I like to start layering in animation as I go, building out more and more details as I start to see the full picture come together. I don't have a solid game plan here, we're just going to start and see where this takes us. In Adobe Fresco, one of the methods of adding motion is using paths and motion presets. I'm going to be showing you this smiley face dude as a quick example to show you some important settings before we dive in. When you open your motion layers panel and select path, you'll see all of these motion presets that you can choose from. I like these and find that they are such a quick and easy way to add motion to your illustration. We've got presets like bob, breathe, sparkle, bounce, spin, sway, flicker, jitter, and an area where you can just customize your own as well. And for each of these presets, you can adjust how intense they are, the direction that they move, their speed, etc. I really love using these, I find them super useful. I tend to grab breathe and sway the most, and I turn the percentage down pretty low just to add some subtle motion in the background of an illustration, or do something that just feels LA. What do you have to say?
Hello?
I don't know if you guys heard that, but that's my cat crying for attention. She's very independent until I'm recording voiceovers, and then she has to be right in the way. Anyways, as you can see with all these custom settings, you could get really creative with how you make one of your elements move around your design. The possibilities are honestly endless. When you select path, you can also just draw a line across your screen and have your design follow that exact path that you drew, which is a game changer. I'm going to be showing you how I use these motion presets as well as some frame-by-frame animation in action, but first you need to understand frame rates and why they're important, or else you might end up with a glitchy animation. So I'm going to add another layer and draw a circle that I also want to add motion to. This is another great part about Fresco, is that you can animate individual layers on their own timeline, which you can't do in every single drawing app. Alright, so I'm drawing a similar path to our smiley face, and then I'm going to hit pause and then hit play all to see both layers moving at the same time. As you can see, they are going at the exact same speed, and that is because they are both set to a frame rate of 48 frames per second. Now I can go into the motion settings for just one of my elements, so I'm going to go to the circle and I'm going to go down to frames, and I'm going to change that number from 48 down to 12 and see what happens. Because 12 goes into 48 4 times, the circle is now looping across the screen 4 times for every one loop that the smiley face makes. This works because the frame rates are divisible by the same number, so each element can complete their loops at the same time. Now, see what happens when I change the circle to a random frame rate number? Did you see that glitch there? The smiley face glitched essentially because the two frame rates are offset. Don't overthink this, just make sure that all of your frame rates are divisible by the same number. It's best to just keep them in increments of 12, and you can alter them based on how fast you want your layers to move. Okay, we are back in action working on our water, and I just want to make this move very steadily, so I'm going to use the breathe preset and I'm going to set the percentage to a 2. Now that it's slightly growing and shrinking, you can see that it's extending beyond my water and going into the sky. I want to keep it only moving within the green box below it, so I'm going to make sure that layer is right above the green box layer, and then I'm going to set it as a clipping mask by tapping this button right here. Now you can see that it's still moving, but it's only within that water area and it's no longer going into the sky. Okay, so moving on to our skeleton dude. If I know I'm going to be adding motion to an illustration, I like to always draw the head on a separate layer just in case I want to make the head bob. This would be pretty simple to do using frame-by-frame animation, but it's even easier using the sway tool, which is what I often do. I like to set it to a 2 or 3% just so it's slowly moving back and forth. As you can see, his head's now just like bobbing back and forth, nodding in approval, he's mad chillin'. But I actually decided that I wanted to make the whole skeleton move at the same time, and it'd make more sense with it bobbing through the water. So I'm gonna move that skull down into the body group layer and make it one big group so that I can make the whole thing move. Alright, so in theory, the bob preset would be awesome for this since I want him to bob in the water, but I find that this is just all over the place and a little unrealistic even when I turn the percentage way down. So I feel like using the sway preset is going to be a better fit as it has him just slowly moving back and forth. Yep, that's perfect. He looks like he's just chilling in his tube, not a worry in the world. Now I want to add some dimension and shading to the water around the tube to show some motion and make it a bit more realistic. I'm using a pixel brush and just going in with some darker and lighter shades and then using the smudging tool to blend those out into what hopefully looks like ripples in the water. I typically use mostly vector brushes, but when it comes to making motion graphics, I've been loving to use pixel brushes and live brushes to add blending and shading. I just think this style in combination with motion tools can create some really cool effects. Okay, now I want to make this water move a bit as if it's rippling out from the inner tube, and I think the breathe preset is going to work perfectly because I just want it to move in and out from the tube, and that grow shrink motion kind of already does that. And when I set that percentage down to a 2 and make it nice and subtle, I think that looks perfect. And throughout the process, I like to continuously hit play all just to see what everything is looking like while it's moving together. I really like the way it looks when I blend together my more graphic line art style with the shading and blended areas, so I'm adding in some lines in the water to further show that ripple effect around the inner tube. I want these lines to move too, but I just want them to have a very subtle wiggle to them. And I'm just using frame-by-frame animation to create this effect, so all I do is I add a new frame and I redraw every line nearly the exact same. And those tiny little differences will create this cool wiggle effect in the end, or it'll look like it's kind of vibrating. I like to use 2 or 3 frames for this. Here I'm using 3, so I'm going to redraw all these lines 3 times, each in their own frame. The previous frames will show up as this purple color, which is known as onion skins, which just basically helps to show you what the last frame was so that you can trace over it or change it how you want to. And then when I go and hit play all, you'll see that it just has this super subtle, fun bit of motion added to it. And then I'm just going to repeat all the same steps that I did to my skeleton dude to this floating pumpkin right here. So we're making the pumpkin sway a little bit, we're adding some water effects around it, making that blended area breathe in and out, and then we're going to do some frame-by-frame animation for those little wiggle lines that we got going on. Alright, this is looking pretty dang cool so far, I have to admit. But we still have so much to do. I am just getting more and more ideas as I'm going through all of this process, and I decided that I want the inside of the pumpkin to glow. So we're gonna try that out. I need to start by making the inside of the pumpkin colors their own layer, so I'm going to actually unfill the inside of the pumpkin. If you go to the fill bucket and you turn the opacity all the way down to 0, pro tip, and then you fill the areas, you're unfilling them. Super useful thing to know. Alright, so I'm just going in with the darker color and filling in those areas behind the eyes and the mouth of the pumpkin. Then I'm going to go in with a lighter, warmer color and just add a little bit in on top of that dark and use the smudging tool to blend it out. And that so quickly looked like the inside of a pumpkin. I'm really stoked on that. Okay, and then we can't have motion layers happening within another motion layer group. So I'm going to take those colors and move them outside of the pumpkin layer. I'm going to put them below the pumpkin, and then just that yellow color is what I'm going to make move. And the sparkle and the flicker presets are already giving glowing pumpkin. Those are pretty much perfect, but I think sparkle is the winner. That looks perfect as it is. I'm going to check to see what it looks like when I hit play all, and it's looking pretty sweet, guys. Okay, and then I also want to go ahead and add a little bit of a sparkling glow outside the pumpkin. So I'm just taking that same warm color and drawing a bit of a circle. Then I'm using the smudging tool to smudge out the edges and sort of blend those out and make them softer. Then turning that opacity way down, and then I'm going to use the same motion preset sparkle to kind of give it that like glowing vibe. I think that's looking pretty dang cool. I decided that I'm going to turn the opacity on that glow down just a little bit more to make it more subtle, and now I think it's perfect. Now for our shark fin that I'm going to have swimming through the water. I want it to look like it's moving through the water and not having such a harsh edge, so I'm going to use a pixel brush with that watercolor and draw across the bottom of it and use a smudging tool to smudge it out and make it look a little bit softer. And then using frame by frame animation, I'm going to go ahead and duplicate the first frame and then just smudge the next frame after, just barely, so that it's the same but with a little bit of motion in there, just so that it looks like it's kind of moving through the water and there's a little bit of a wiggle happening. See how subtle that is, but yet it looks like the shark is already kind of moving, or at least the water is moving around the shark fin. Then using the path tool, we can go ahead and draw a path for where we want our shark fin to be swimming. And if you don't like a path that you drew, you can just go ahead and click this X over here, and that's going to erase it, and then you can start over and draw a new path. And then we can start to play around with some of these custom settings as well. I thought the grow and shrink looked pretty cool. It almost felt like the shark was swimming in more of a zigzag path, coming closer to you and then farther away. You can also play with adding multiples, so it'll multiply your element and create several of them in the same path, and then you can scatter those as well. So this is a really easy way to add a bunch of one element that you drew, working smarter instead of harder. Wow, it looks pretty cool having those scattered shark fins in the front. I know that I want one in the front and one in the back. I think that will just create a really cool balanced look. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate my shark fin layer, and I'm going to use the transform tool to just move the whole group to the back in the background behind the pumpkin. I'm going to flip it too so that it's going to be going in the opposite direction as the one in the front. And when you move a layer that is on a motion path, you need to redraw the path that it's on. So the path isn't going to move with the shark fin, basically. So I'll need to draw a new path for it to move along, and I'm going to put that layer in the background too. That way it's moving behind the pumpkin. And yeah, we're going to draw this new path and have that shark fin swimming in the background in the opposite direction as the one in the forefront. And this is looking pretty dang cool so far, but I think there's more that I can do. I want to play around with the moon a little bit, see what it looks like to maybe have the moon rising from the water up into the sky and out of the frame. I think this might be a little bit busy with everything else that I have going on, so maybe I'll just add some subtle motion to the moon using one of the presets, of course. When in doubt, I just like to make an element breathe. I feel like it's just so nice and subtle and kind of keeps that motion going, but doesn't ever feel too busy. You know what I mean? Alright, now I'm going to add a new layer, and I'm going to start getting a little bit more detailed, playing around with some blending. I want to add some fog in here. I feel like That would just give it the coolest eerie feeling if there was some fog and the night sky surrounding the full moon. So I'm using that pixel brush again and the smudging tool and just creating a few of these like fog-like clouds and duplicating them, moving them around the screen, and sort of smudging them horizontally too, so they have that like long wispy feel. And I'm gonna make them breathe as well. Who'd have thunk? But I just feel like that makes it this nice kind of like subtle. How many times am I going to say subtle in this video? I really, really like when in a design there's a lot moving, but it's all such subtle movements that you can't necessarily pinpoint what's moving, and it just feels like the whole thing is alive, if that makes sense. So I don't have a better way to describe it than saying subtle. I'm also going in and adding some like texture into the water. So I took a pixel brush and added some dark around the edges and some light in the center. I'm adding in some of these cool textures and colors into the pumpkin and the skeleton as well. I just wanted to bring a few more colors in and really add some depth to what we've got going on here. I don't very often add kind of shading and textures like this in, but I love how it turned out. I think that looks super cool, and because I had a little bit more detail and texture in the night sky with that blended fog and in the water, it felt wrong to just keep my skeleton dude and my pumpkin more of flat colors, so adding in those textures really helped. And now I'm thinking about what else I can add in, and I'm thinking it's a good idea to add in some translucent green circles that are going to look like bubbles. And because I want this ocean scene to feel more eerie and almost like a green swamp, so having these bubbles kind of float up the screen would be really, really cool. And I only have to draw one or two because I'm going to use the motion paths, and I'm going to add multiples and scatter them around, so I only need to make one circle, and out of that circle I'm going to get a bunch of bubbles all over the screen. So again, work smarter, not harder. And then I decided that I wanted more of those wiggly lines that we put around the pumpkin and around the inner tube to be scattered throughout the water. So I'm just adding those in and then doing the frame by frame animation, redrawing them and making them wiggle a little bit. Then I decided that I wanted to play around with the moon a little bit more and maybe change its positioning and its size and play around with some cool moonlight effects. Now I'm taking that textured pixel brush and drawing in some darkness around the edges of the design, and then I'm using a soft eraser with some pressure sensitivity to gently erase where I want the moonlight to shine against the design. I think we are almost done. This is what it looks like when we hit play all. And I'm just going to go in and add a few more finishing touches, just a little bit of shading and depth where I think that it is needed throughout the design. I'm also going to add in my artist name, Low and Flow, and I'll go ahead and make that breathe too. Why not? The completed animation is looking very cool, very spooky. I love this time of year. It always gets me more excited to draw. And if I'm being honest, this was just a little day project that I did to help me get out of a creative rut, and I feel like it really helped me. I've been up against some serious artist block recently. I just haven't felt called to draw or create anything, and kind of pushing through and working on this got me excited again, and so for that I am grateful. Now I'm just going to go ahead and export by hitting publish and export, going to motion, and then I'm going to select MP4. I just want to make it a normal video to share on Instagram. You can go ahead and set how many times you want it to loop, so I'm going to make it loop as plenty of times, and I can kind of cut that down later if I want to. Then you'll hit generate frames, and it'll give you a preview of what it's going to look like before you export it, just to double check. Still looking pretty dang awesome if you ask me. And then I just hit export and I go ahead and airdrop it to myself. And to complete the animation, I added some text in Adobe Express. It's super easy to access all your favorite fonts and add animations to them, so I like doing that step there. I hope this video was helpful. Don't forget to leave a comment, like, subscribe, you know the drill. Help your girl out so I can keep making videos for you guys. All right, go make some art. Cheers!